Before I ever do messages, I always ask God in advance what He wants me to do, and sometimes I don't find out till the last moment. And sometimes He tells me ahead of time when I ask for confirmation, just because I don't ever want to do a message just for the sake of doing a message. I want to do what the Holy Spirit's leading me to do, because I want to speak His word. Because I could have the best message prepared in the world, but if it's not what the Holy Spirit has planned, if it's not something that's necessarily going to reach the heart of somebody, it's just a waste of my breath. So that's the way I stand on that. So what I want to ask today is, why are we here? You know, I came at questions like this during my life in my early 20s, and I think a lot of us ask that question throughout our lifetime. I still know people today who are asking that question, especially people who aren't walking with God. And to be truthfully honest, during my early 20s, that was a time when I kind of started to wane away from God, not being so close to Him. And I started to ask those questions too. You know, as soon as you start walking away from Him, it's so easy to do that you start to forget what everything's all about. You forget why we're here, what's the whole meaning and the point and the purpose. Even like when we're going to church, we can still pose this question, because you can go to church and you can still not walk with God. And I was walking pretty strong with Him during my high school years. And when you get out into the world, when you get to a place where you're not around those people all the time who are good influences, when you're not always around those environments that keep you close to Him, it's easy to forget, especially when you're out trying to make money and stuff, and you got your daily chores and your tasks involved. It's easy to get pulled away from that. And back during those times, it was kind of a dark time for me. You know, I was seeking fulfillment in different ways. I mean, one of the biggest ways was seeking fulfillment with relationships. That doesn't work if you don't have God in there. It really doesn't. I mean, relationships can kind of help, but it's kind of like the same kind of help as like eating food. It provides a momentary pleasure in the moment, but it's not something that lasts. God is the one who makes you whole. You know, I think I read it in a book once that he was actually quoting a movie by Jerry Maguire or something where he says, "You make me complete." He like says that to the woman he's with, and it's like, it was funny because the author said, you know, if there was a sequel to that book, it'd probably end with like, okay, so that didn't work out so well. And that's kind of the truth, is that God's the one who makes us complete. You know, Monica said it well recently here. It's like there's a God-shaped hole in our heart, and He's the only one who can fulfill those needs and those things inside of us. And I'm not going to really go into the details as far as relationships and all that goes, because I've got things to cover here. But the point I'm trying to get at with that is that when we start to veer off course from God, we start to lose focus of what things are. And we start to wander off away from the light into the darkness, if you want to put it like that. But I started to wonder why I was here. And there were times, a lot of my friends left, and it was just me. You know, I had some family around, but it was just me as far as things go friend-wise, and I never had anyone that super close to begin with. And I started to have times where I would have this attitude where, like, it wouldn't be so bad if I didn't wake up tomorrow. And that's a sad place to be, because that's just basically saying, I'm just droning on with my life. I don't actually see a purpose in it. I'm just here. I'm just sucking in air, and I'm just eating food, that's all. Just trying to live, but not really living. And that's the truth of the matter when it comes to Jesus, because He says that I'm the life. If Jesus is your life, if you don't have Him, or if you're not seeing Him, you're not walking with Him, you're going to lose sight of that life that you have. And I want to come to that. But you know what it really reminded me thinking about these things is I was thinking about the Israelites when, after the Exodus and everything, how many times they veered off course from God, how many times they forgot about Him. Things start to get good, and they think everything's fine, and then they're like, okay, God, thanks for the help. We don't really need you anymore. We'll call you when we need help again. And so things are good for a while because of God's grace. he comes back and he tries to help them. He warns them. He sends people. You know, it's funny because a lot of people look at the Old Testament. I've heard people say this before. They say God was a mean God and he did all this awful stuff. And look what he did. But it's like, if you actually go in there and you actually read it and you don't just phase over it, you'll see how many times God warned them over and over again. You know, it's like the parent who's like counting 1, 2, 3, but there's a lot of 1.5s and 3/4 and things like that because he really wants them to get this right. And he's trying to keep them to where they're on course in life with him. They've got to see without him, they're nothing. We're dead without him. And that's how we feel like when we're at that state when we wonder what the purpose in our lives is, that it's like we're dead inside in a sense. And that's what God was trying to show them, that without me, you guys are dead spiritually, so you don't have a meaning there. And when I was thinking about this, because like I experienced God, I saw the goodness of him, but there were times when I started to stray away. And I was just thinking about this, you know, because I wondered about like how could they have known God like that and then still turn away from him. But then I was just thinking about it even today. This came to me and I was thinking, you know, it's like I felt kind of like them in a sense. You know, I knew God, but yet I started to veer away. It's like spiritual amnesia. It's like, how did I forget the goodness of God and what that's like? But when we get hung up on things of this life, like relationships, or like jobs or finances and things like that, we get our minds so focused on the temporal things that we forget about the eternal things, the things that really give us life, and that's Jesus. I'm going to go to Ecclesiastes chapter 1. I actually was just going to do a portion of this, but I actually read it and I feel like the whole thing's appropriate, and so I'm going to just go over it with you. And just for the sake of not having to flip back and forth throughout my Bible, I've got things pulled up in like my Bible app and some other places, so that'll make it easier. But if you want to go to Ecclesiastes chapter 1 with me, I'm going to read the whole thing. It's really good. Well, it's not, but the message behind it is good. Alright, so I'm just going to give you a couple seconds to get there. I'm just going to take a drink, and you guys can read with me if you want to. If not, that's okay, because I'm reading directly from it, so you can trust me if you want to. It's up to you. So, Ecclesiastes chapter 1, this is Solomon. And Solomon, in Proverbs, Solomon is following God. And in Kings, when it's talking about Solomon, he's following God. He's trusting him, he's listening to his word, and he's obeying. And so he's got all these amazing things happening. You know, he built the temple. He had like the Queen of Sheba come, and they gave him all kinds of stuff. He's like the richest king. He's got all these things going on. In Ecclesiastes 1, you're going to hear a different side of Solomon than you did back then because he's got everything. But let's take a look at this and see what he says. So, he says, "These are the words of the teacher, King David's son who ruled in Jerusalem." He's talking about himself, Solomon. And you'll get what I'm talking about. The title of this chapter on my phone is called "Everything is Meaningless." It says, "Everything is meaningless," says the teacher, "completely meaningless. What do people get for all their hard work under the sun? Generations come and generations go, but the earth never changes. The sun rises and the sun sets, then hurries around to rise again. The wind blows south and then turns north. Around and around it goes, blowing in circles. Rivers run into the sea, but the sea is never full. Then the water returns again to the rivers and flows out again to the sea. Everything is wearisome beyond description." It's basically saying he feels pretty empty and he's never fulfilled. "No matter how much we see, we are never satisfied. No matter how much we hear, we are not content. History merely repeats itself. It has all been done before." Been there, done that, that's what he's saying. "Nothing under the sun is truly new. Sometimes people say, 'Here is something new.' But actually, it is old. Nothing is ever truly new. We don't remember what happened in the past, and in the future generations, no one will remember what we are doing now. I, the teacher, was the king of Israel and lived in Jerusalem. I devoted myself to search for understanding and to explore by wisdom everything being done under heaven. I soon discovered that God has dealt a tragic existence to the human race. I observed everything going on under the sun, and really, it is all meaningless, like chasing the wind. What is wrong cannot be made right. What is missing cannot be recovered. I said to myself, look, I am wiser than any of the other kings who ruled in Jerusalem before me. I have greater wisdom and knowledge than any of them. So I set out to learn everything from wisdom to madness and folly. But I learned firsthand that pursuing all of this is like chasing the wind. The greater my wisdom, the greater my grief. To the increased knowledge only increases sorrow. So basically he's saying life's a bummer. So the thing about that is that in Ecclesiastes, this is where Solomon has stepped away from God. This is where Solomon is now following idols and things like that. Because like if you read back in Kings, one of the things that King David warned Solomon about, and Solomon even said when he was proclaiming over the temple, was, that he didn't want to veer away from God and he wanted to stay close to him. And God told him that if he stayed close to him, everything would be fine. But he also said, don't go marrying a whole bunch of wives, especially ones from different religions, because they'll pull you away from me. In layman's terms, that's basically what he said. I've read this before. And this is what Solomon did. He fell into this trap. Like I said, they had a palace full of like 1,000 wives or something. And a lot of them had different beliefs from different countries because he was big on girls, I guess. And so it said that he even put up like an Asherah pole. He put up idols and things like that. By doing this, by trying to please somebody else and not following God, he lost his meaning in life. If you read back in the stuff beforehand when he was king and he was following God, it's all great. It's like sunshine and rainbows. Everything is perfect, is great. And then you read in Ecclesiastes after he decided to veer away from him, look what happened. Now all of a sudden he's saying life is meaningless. And if you read further on in chapter 2 and so forth, he talks about how he tried everything under the sun, He tried humor. He tried all these different things with money and expenses. Basically, it's like saying it's like someone who just won the lottery and went and wasted it all, went bonkers. Like, I got a jet ski and I got all this stuff. And when they find out, I'm still not happy. That's what he's saying, because without God, it doesn't have meaning. Having Jesus puts things in proper perspective to what actually holds meaning, because he's the one who gives it meaning. When we start to make an idol out of something else, what we're doing is we're making that God, because we're saying, this is what makes me happy, when God's like, no, I make you happy. I give you things like this that can be fun, pleasures and things like that you can enjoy. But we got to realize it's kind of like saying, okay, well, you had fun with your toy, put it down now, and then come hang out with me. But the child's saying no to the parent because they still want to keep doing this. And pretty soon they become absorbed with it. It's almost like they become zombified with it to a degree. But they don't realize that they're no longer having fun. Now they're just annoyed because they're trying to get past the next level on the video game or something and they can't beat it. And they're just, by the time they're done with it, they're screaming at it. It's kind of like that in a sense. And so, it's interesting because I was reading another book called Gods at War. A while back I read this. It's a great book. You should definitely check it out. It's by Kyle Adelman. But he was talking about this very subject. And what he was talking about in that was that C.S. Lewis, he actually wrote a book and he was talking about this very thing. And he says, if Solomon searched for everything under the sun and didn't find meaning, wouldn't it make sense that maybe it's something above the sun that actually has the meaning? In other words, what's in heaven? We're talking about God. Now, in my notes, I actually put, look above the sun to the Son of God. That's kind of where I came out with it. And it's really true, because when I started coming back to God, when I started following Him, it was like all of a sudden I was like, why did I ever leave you in the first place? It was all of a sudden, it was like my life had meaning and purpose again. Before that, it was a drag. But when I got back with Him, and when He set me free from the things I was going through, I was like, man, like I knew it the whole time even, because in the back of your mind, you actually know, but you're stubborn because you're putting it aside because you want to get the worldly things, and finally at some point, hopefully you realize it's not fulfilling. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. And that's the thing, is that last one, a lot of people sometimes skip over the life. They forget that part. It's like, yeah, he's the way to the Father, and he's the truth. I know he's the truth, but sometimes we forget that he's the life. That's where I'm getting at with this, is that he's what gives us life. Without him, we're dead. We're spiritually dead in a sense. And even looking back to the story of the prodigal son, when he said, when the son finally came back, he said, my son was dead, but now he's alive. So he's not saying that he's physically dead, obviously. He meant he was spiritually dead, because when he was away from him, he wasn't connected to the life source. God is the life source. He's the one who makes us. And Jesus is also the Word. John said that in the beginning of the chapter of John, that he was the Word in the beginning, and was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And David said that your words give me life. And God's words is Jesus. Jesus is the Word. And also that he's a lamp to our feet and a light unto our path. And part of that meaning that sometimes we don't see this, not just saying that he's saying, okay, well, this is the direction you should go. It's like saying, without him, you're walking in darkness. We forget that he guides us every step of the way and shows us which way to go. You know, it's like following after him gives us an actual path, a guidance, a way to go. And without that, we're just stumbling around in the darkness, and things are meaningless. And so everything kind of ties together with that. Let me see where I'm at with this. Okay, so now I'm ready to go to Luke chapter 24. And this actually is really cool because I actually really love this story, but it's not mentioned very often in sermons that I've heard before. The interesting thing is I read it and I was just fascinated with it this last time around that I started reading it about a week or two ago. And I've been staying on it the whole time. I haven't got off it. I mean, I've looked at other things, but I keep coming back to it, and it really keeps holding on to me here. And the other cool thing is I wasn't even thinking about using it because I only wrote the sermon today. But yesterday I'm reading a book that we got at a worship conference, and the chapter I was reading quoted this, and I was thinking, you know what, maybe I am supposed to use this because maybe God's telling me something here. But this is a very cool story. It's going to be Luke chapter 24, 13 through 40. I'm going to pause partway through, and I'll just pick up, and I'll let you know when I do pick up. This is the road to Emmaus, or the walk to Emmaus. So I'm going to come into here, and we're going to start with verse 13. It says, that same day. And you know what, I'm going to actually just tell you real quick in case you don't know the story. This is after Jesus was crucified. So, it says, that same day, 2 of Jesus' followers were walking to the village of Emmaus, 7 miles from Jerusalem. As they walked along, they were talking about everything that had happened. As they talked and discussed these things, Jesus himself suddenly came and began walking with them. But God kept them from recognizing him. He asked them, what are you discussing so intently as you walk along? They stopped short, sadness written across their faces. Then one of them, Cleopas, replied, you must be the only person in Jerusalem who hasn't heard about all the things that have happened there the last few days. What things? Jesus asked. You know what I like about this is that Jesus is asking questions, but he already knows. That's the cool thing, is a lot of the time we don't realize that Jesus is asking us questions, and he asked it a lot throughout his ministry because it makes you think. It makes you go back over the things that have happened or things you've been thinking about. And the funny thing about that is sometimes he does that, and when someone asks you a question and you start thinking about it, you either find out that you know some of the facts or you don't really know what you're talking about at all. And that's kind of the funny thing there, but Jesus does it to make you think. He gets the wheels turning. And then he's able to reveal something to you within that. So, verse 19, what things? Jesus asked. The things that happened to Jesus, the man from Nazareth, they said. He was a prophet. He did powerful miracles, and he was a mighty teacher in the eyes of God and all the people. But our leading priests and other religious leaders handed him over to be condemned to death, and they crucified him. We had hoped he was the Messiah who had come to rescue Israel. This all happened 3 days ago. Then some women from our group of his followers were at his tomb early this morning, and they came back with an amazing report. They said his body was missing, and they had seen angels who told them Jesus is alive. Some of our men ran out to see, and sure enough, His body was gone, just as the women had said. You know, the sad thing is that the women told him, and they didn't even believe still. You know, there was like, it seemed like there wasn't even an inkling of hope. You can tell because when you read back there, it says that they were downcast, sadness written across their face. They didn't believe. There wasn't even kind of like a what if he is alive and kind of like a curiosity. They didn't believe. Then Jesus said to them, "You foolish people, you find it so hard to believe all that the prophets wrote in the scriptures. Wasn't it clearly predicted that the Messiah would have to suffer all these things before entering his glory?" Then Jesus took them through the writings of Moses and all the prophets, explaining from all of the scriptures the things concerning himself. By this time they were nearing Emmaus, and the end of their journey. Jesus acted as if he were going on, but they begged him, "Stay the night with us, since it is getting late." So he went home with them. I'm just going to pause there for just a second. The interesting thing is it says he was acting if he were going on. Now the question is, was he actually going to go on, or was he just doing that? And it makes me think back to the story when the woman, I think she was Samaritan or something, she wasn't a Jew, she wasn't an Israelite, and she was trying to get Jesus to heal her daughter of demons. And he said, why should I give help to you when I'm supposed to be helping the Israelites? Basically, to put it in layman's terms. But if you listen further on, she begs him and says that even dogs get scratched from the master's table. And he says, "Good answer." The reason why he said that is because he was testing her to see, how hungry are you really for this? How much do you really want this? And if you look at this, when it says he was acting if he were going on, it's kind of like, do you want me to stay? Do you want me to stay? It's kind of like saying, come on, just say it. But it's like saying, are you hungry? Do you want more? And it says later on in here that they were burning inside when Jesus was telling them this stuff, and I want to get there. It says, by this time they were nearing Emmaus, and at the end of their journey, Jesus acted as if he were going on, but they begged him, "Stay the night with us, since it's getting late." So he went home with them. And as they sat down to eat, he took the bread and blessed it. Then he broke it and gave it to them. Suddenly their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And at that moment he disappeared. They said to each other, "Didn't our hearts burn within us as he talked with us on the road and explained the scriptures to us?" And within the hour they were on their way back to Jerusalem. They found the 11 disciples and the others who had gathered with them, who said, "The Lord has already risen. He appeared to Peter." So, one of the interesting things about that is it's like they couldn't see. And it's interesting because this talks about this story with Jesus coming and walking alongside us. How many times does Jesus come and he walks alongside us and we don't even see that he's walking alongside us? It's like he's a stranger because we're so preoccupied with things that have happened in our